My husband hid his mistress as brake fluid low, so I exposed him in front of his own mother at 70 miles per hour. The mechanized voice of Apple Siri echoed through the Audi's 12-speaker surround sound system, crisp, perfectly modulated, and completely devastating. I was doing 65 miles per hour down the interstate with my notoriously strict, high-society mother-in-law sitting in the passenger seat, gripping the heated leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles had turned completely translucent. We were supposed to be headed to a high-end Sunday family brunch, but the car's digital navigation system was about to reroute us straight to my marriage's public execution. I am a lead mobile architect. My daily professional existence revolves entirely around building the invisible, highly complex, encrypted frameworks that modern mobile applications run on. I don't deal in front-end aesthetics. I deal in raw, unadulterated back-end logic. I monitor massive data streams. I heavily optimize secure API calls, and I build impenetrable digital tunnels that keep user data completely isolated from malicious, outside actors. My brain is perpetually wired to look for digital anomalies, fatal memory leaks, and unauthorized access points. So when my husband, Greg, left his secondary work phone sitting innocently in the wireless charging cradle of his brand new, obscenely expensive Audi RS7, my internal diagnostic systems immediately booted up. Sitting quietly in the meticulously conditioned, ventilated pearl leather passenger seat next to me was Eleanor. Eleanor is a woman who treats high society like a highly competitive, ruthless blood sport. She wears tailored, authentic Chanel suits to casual weekend brunches and smells faintly of expensive imported gin and crushed lavender. She is a towering, intimidating pillar of old money stoicism who has spent the last entire decade proudly boasting to anyone who would listen about her son's unbreakable moral compass and his impeccable corporate integrity. To Eleanor, Greg wasn't just a highly successful tech executive, he was the absolute second coming of the Wharton School of Business. He could do absolutely no wrong in her icy blue eyes. Greg had supposedly been called into an emergency, high-priority server migration at a remote, highly secure data center on the edge of the city. He had rushed around the kitchen that morning, kissed my cheek with practiced affection, grabbed his primary personal phone, and tossed me the heavy, brushed aluminum keys to the Audi. He told me to take his mother to our reservation at the exclusive country club. Take the RS7, babe. Treat mom to the good ride, he had said, flashing that polished, charismatic smile that originally won me over 5 years ago. But in his frantic rush to play the dedicated, overworked corporate soldier, he forgot the black iPhone 14 Pro sitting face down in the center console. What Greg also forgot, or fundamentally misunderstood about modern vehicle telemetry, was that his secondary device was completely integrated into the Audi's MI infotainment system. He had previously established a high-bandwidth, trusted wireless CarPlay handshake. The exact moment I started the ignition and the massive V8 engine roared to life, the car's computer recognized the device. The 12-inch virtual cockpit flared brightly, aggressively syncing his encrypted contacts, his private notifications, and his deeply buried secrets directly into the primary dashboard display right behind the steering wheel. We were cruising smoothly down the I-95 corridor at exactly 68 miles per hour. The cabin of the luxury vehicle was whisper quiet, heavily insulated by dual-pane acoustic glass that completely blocked out the wind. Eleanor was staring silently out the passenger window, casually adjusting the massive, blinding diamond ring on her left hand, softly humming a classical concerto. The emotional tension between us was always a tightly coiled spring, but today, it was almost surprisingly peaceful. The rich, intoxicating smell of German leather and Eleanor's overpowering perfume filled the confined space. A sharp, distinct, high-pitched chime suddenly cut through the heavy silence. A high-contrast notification card aggressively slid down from the top edge of the digital dashboard display, momentarily blocking my digital speedometer. The incoming contact name read in bold, clinical text, system alert, brake fluid low. Now, to a normal, untrained driver, this would cause a brief moment of mechanical panic. You might immediately look for the nearest highway exit. You might tap the interactive screen to dismiss it and call a mechanic. But I am an architect. I stare at complex user interfaces for a living. In less than a microscopic fraction of a second, my eyes aggressively scanned the typography on the screen. The font kerning, the highly specific microscopic spacing between the letters, was fundamentally, undeniably wrong. Native Audi OS warning messages strictly use a proprietary, heavily optimized sans serif font specifically designed for instant readability at high speeds. This notification was rendering in Apple standard San Francisco text. Furthermore, the tiny icon next to the text wasn't a glowing amber dashboard mechanical light. It was a tiny, vibrant green iMessage bubble. It wasn't a diagnostic car error. It was a masked, highly obfuscated contact name. Greg had intentionally manipulated his internal contact list to perfectly hide incoming texts from someone highly specific, disguising them as mundane, easily ignored ignored car maintenance alerts. I immediately reached out, my index finger extending to aggressively swipe the digital notification away, to kill the rogue process before it could fully execute. I was entirely too slow. Greg, in his infinite, arrogant wisdom, had previously enabled an accessibility automation called announce notifications. He had specifically configured his secondary device to automatically read incoming text messages from important contacts out loud over the car's audio system so he wouldn't have to look away from the road during his long commutes. The soft classical music abruptly muted. The car's internal AI, utilizing all 12 premium Bang & Olufsen surround sound speakers, spoke in a crystal clear, unervingly cheerful, digitized voice. New alert from brake fluid low. The suite at the Four Seasons is booked under my name tonight, babe. Tell the old lady in your ball and chain you're stuck at the data center. Can't wait to see you in that silk set you bought me with Eleanor's gift money. The silence that instantly followed the robotic voice was not empty. It was a heavy, suffocating, physical weight that immediately compressed the oxygen completely out of the cabin. It was the deafening sound of an entire, carefully constructed reality fracturing into microscopic, jagged pieces. The heavy tires continued to hum rhythmically against the asphalt. The digital speedometer held completely steady at 68. But inside that car, a catastrophic, unrecoverable system failure had just aggressively occurred. I felt the intense heat instantly rising in my neck and my vision went completely blurry with rage. The blood pounded viciously in my temples, a rhythmic, deafening drumbeat of sheer, unadulterated betrayal. My hands locked onto the heated steering wheel with such bone-crushing, violent force that the premium leather actually creaked under the immense pressure. Ball and chain. That was me. The dedicated, exhausted wife who routinely spent her late nights meticulously debugging his sloppy code when he was desperately trying to launch his failing startup 3 years ago. And, brake fluid low, was currently waiting for him in a luxury, overpriced hotel suite, wearing imported lingerie bought with our family money. But that's when the real bombshell dropped. You need to thoroughly understand the exact, devastating, highly illegal nature of the phrase Eleanor's gift money. Just 3 short weeks prior, Eleanor had carefully transferred exactly $50,000 from her highly protected, high-yield retirement trust fund directly into Greg's personal checking account. It wasn't a casual, generous birthday gift. It was a highly specific, legally designated financial down payment. We were supposed to be jointly purchasing a sprawling, deeply secluded lakefront vacation home in upstate New York, a massive property where Eleanor could comfortably spend her long summers, and where Greg and I could eventually raise a family. Eleanor had completely liquidated a massive, incredibly lucrative stock portfolio to make that specific cash transfer happen. He wasn't just casually cheating on his wife in a cheap motel. He was systematically, intentionally, and financially defrauding his own elderly mother to heavily fund a secret, high-end, obscenely expensive double life. I slowly, mechanically turned my heavy head to look directly at the passenger seat. Eleanor, the towering, unshakable pillar of old money grace, had undergone a terrifying, instant physical transformation. The haughty, superior flush in her aged cheeks had completely vanished. She had turned a shade of stark, translucent, terrifying white that perfectly matched the premium pearl leather upholstery she was sitting on. Her mouth was slightly open, completely aghast, and her perfectly manicured hands were trembling violently where they rested tightly on her matching designer Chanel handbag. I didn't violently swerve the car. I didn't aggressively pull over to the gravel emergency shoulder. I didn't let out a hysterical, emotional scream. I am a senior engineer. When a critical error entirely destroys your operational environment, you don't sit there and cry over the corrupted data. You immediately initiate the hostile trace protocols. You hunt down the exact source of the malicious breach. I forcefully reached out and aggressively pressed the haptic feedback dial on the center console, completely overriding the active digital navigation route to the country club. I entirely bypassed the standard Apple Maps user interface and forcefully accessed the car's deep integrated navigation API. Because Greg and I still shared a highly integrated family iCloud ecosystem, his secondary work phone was currently actively broadcasting a high-precision, encrypted GPS, live location, ping every 30 seconds. I aggressively pulled up the raw telemetry data onto the massive screen. The bright, pulsating blue dot representing his physical device wasn't anywhere near the sprawling, highly secured industrial tech park where the corporate data center was located. The exact GPS coordinates placed him exactly 3.2 miles away, completely stationary, deeply inside the geo-fenced perimeter of the Grandview Boutique, a highly exclusive, ridiculously overpriced local hotel locally known for its discreet underground parking and dark, incredibly intimate lobby bars. I looked directly over at Eleanor. The violent trembling in her hands had completely, unervingly stopped. Her eyes were wide, incredibly dark, and locked intensely onto the glowing blue dot aggressively pulsing on the dashboard screen. "He thinks he's at a server migration," I whispered, my voice dropping into a cold, entirely metallic, emotionless register. "Shall we go check the hardware?" Eleanor didn't flinch. She slowly, deliberately reached into her expensive designer bag, pulled out her heavy gold-rimmed reading glasses, and slid them perfectly onto her face. Her voice, when she finally spoke, sounded exactly like a piece of heavily sharpened glass aggressively scraping across a raw concrete floor. "Drive," she hissed, never taking her cold eyes off the digital map. "And give me your unlocked phone. I need to call my primary estate lawyer and the bank's executive fraud department right this exact second. He's about to experience a total system crash. I immediately handed her my device, gripped the wheel, and pressed my foot heavily onto the accelerator. The Audi's massive twin-turbo engine violently roared to life, physically pinning us both deep back into the seats as I aggressively merged across 3 busy lanes of highway traffic, sharply taking the next exit at a terrifying speed that would have normally caused her to scream at me. Today, she didn't even blink. The 3-mile drive felt like it took 3 agonizing lifetimes. Eleanor sat completely rigid, barking rapid-fire, highly technical, incredibly destructive financial instructions to a panicked, terrified wealth manager on the other end of the cellular line. She was systematically, ruthlessly freezing his access to every single trust fund, every joint checking account, and every emergency high-limit credit line physically attached to her name. She was mathematically, legally erasing his entire financial safety net in real time. But I had my own highly destructive digital demolition to meticulously execute. I pulled the heavy Audi aggressively into the circular, brick-paved driveway of the Grandview boutique, violently throwing the heavy car into park directly in front of the massive, tinted glass doors. I completely ignored the confused, rushing valet who frantically tapped on my window. I reached deep into my leather tote bag and pulled out my heavy iPad Pro. Greg was a decent, silver-tongued sales executive, but he fundamentally possessed the digital security awareness of an absolute toddler. When he originally purchased and set up his personal MacBook Pro and his massive cloud storage networks, he had casually, lazily asked me to configure all the backend admin permissions because I was the tech genius. I rapidly opened my proprietary mobile device management dashboard. I stared intensely at the active network ping coming directly from his MacBook, which was currently resting completely unguarded on his desk at our shared house. I didn't hesitate for a single microsecond. I aggressively bypassed the standard warning prompts, rapidly typed in my complex 2-factor authentication master code, and executed a remote, unrecoverable, military-grade hard wipe protocol. I sat in the car and watched the digital progress bar instantly fill to 100%. In a matter of mere seconds, his entire local hard drive was securely, permanently rewritten with blank zeros. I then aggressively accessed our shared family Google Workspace and systematically, permanently revoked his security credentials. I ruthlessly locked him out of his personal email, his digital calendar, his banking 2-factor backup codes, and 3 entire years of digital assets, including every single photograph he had ever taken. I didn't just log him out. I completely annihilated his digital footprint. I violently burned his virtual house to the ground and aggressively salted the earth where the servers used to stand. I unbuckled my seatbelt, tucked the heavy iPad tightly under my arm, and looked directly at Eleanor. She forcefully ended her phone call, dropped my phone into the center console, and gave me a single, incredibly sharp nod. We walked aggressively through the heavy glass doors of the hotel lobby side by side. The atmosphere inside was intentionally dark, heavily perfumed with expensive incense, and dripping with pretentious, massively overpriced luxury. A smooth jazz track played softly over hidden, high-end speakers. Wealthy couples murmured in incredibly low tones in velvet-lined, isolated booths. It took my trained eyes exactly 4 seconds to intensely scan the massive room and securely lock onto the target. Greg was sitting confidently in a plush, high-backed leather booth in the extremely far corner of the lobby bar. He was wearing his tailored, charcoal gray, $3,000 suit, the exact one he strictly reserved for high-stakes executive meetings. He was leaning aggressively forward over the low marble table, an incredibly charismatic, predatory smile plastered widely across his face. He was casually clinking a heavy crystal glass of expensive amber bourbon against a sleek martini glass held by a woman. The woman was incredibly young, mid-20s, heavily styled blonde hair, wearing a dangerously plunging, emerald green silk dress that clung tightly to her frame. But my eyes didn't stop on the completely inappropriate dress. They immediately snapped directly to her pale neck. Resting perfectly against her collarbone was a heavy, incredibly intricate, vintage platinum pendant deeply embedded with a massive, absolutely flawless blue sapphire. I heard Eleanor sharply, violently suck in a breath right next to me. The sound was ragged, violent, and completely primal. That necklace wasn't just a shiny piece of expensive jewelry. It was a 120-year-old, priceless family heirloom. It had originally belonged to Eleanor's great-grandmother. Just 2 short months ago, Greg had solemnly, convincingly told his mother that the fragile platinum clasp was deeply damaged and he had personally taken it to a highly exclusive, heavily guarded jeweler in the city for an extended, meticulous cleaning and restoration process. He hadn't taken it to a jeweler. He had actively, maliciously stolen his own family's priceless legacy and draped it arrogantly around the neck of his cheap mistress. I felt a cold, terrifyingly calm, absolute energy completely wash over me. The burning hot rage entirely evaporated, instantly replaced by the clinical, highly detached precision of a seasoned executioner stepping confidently up to the block. We walked slowly, deliberately, entirely in sync across the imported marble floor. My sharp heels clicked in a highly aggressive, rhythmic cadence that loudly echoed right over the soft jazz music. Greg was so deeply, entirely engrossed in whispering intimately into the blonde woman's ear that he didn't even register the impending catastrophic failure rapidly approaching his blind spot. I stopped exactly 2 feet from the edge of the marble table. I stood perfectly, terrifyingly still, clutching the metal iPad tightly to my chest. "How's the server migration going, Greg?" I asked, my voice echoing incredibly loud and perfectly clear across the completely quiet bar. "Are you experiencing any unexpected packet loss?" Greg physically, violently flinched. His head aggressively snapped up, his eyes instantly widening to the exact size of dinner plates. The charismatic, arrogant smile instantly melted completely off his face, aggressively replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated, absolute primal terror. He stared directly at me, completely paralyzed, his jaw working silently as his overloaded brain desperately tried to process the impossible visual data currently rendering in front of him. "Veronica," he choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched, trembling wheeze. He immediately started to frantically scramble backward against the leather booth. What are you doing here?" "I can absolutely explain. This is a highly important client." He didn't get to finish compiling the fabricated line of code. Eleanor smoothly, aggressively bypassed me. She didn't scream hysterically. She didn't make a massive, embarrassing scene. She moved with the terrifying, highly practiced grace of a seasoned apex predator. She walked directly up to the edge of the table, reached out her perfectly manicured, diamond-clad hand, and entirely delicately picked up the mistress's half-full, freezing cold, sticky espresso martini. She didn't violently throw it. Throwing it would have been a massive emotional loss of control. Instead, Eleanor leaned slightly forward, locked her furious, entirely icy blue eyes directly onto her son's terrified face, and slowly, incredibly deliberately tipped the heavy crystal glass forward. She poured the dark, sticky, freezing liquid directly over the crotch of his $3,000 tailored suit pants. Greg let out a sharp, entirely pathetic yelp, desperately trying to push himself backward, but he was physically trapped tightly against the wall of the booth. The dark, sticky liquid heavily stained the light gray fabric, dripping pathetically onto his highly expensive imported leather shoes. The blonde woman shrieked incredibly loudly, instantly jumping up from the table and aggressively clutching the stolen sapphire necklace to her chest. "What the hell is completely wrong with you, you crazy old bitch?" she screamed aggressively, drawing the immediate, highly shocked attention of every single wealthy patron in the high-end lobby. Eleanor slowly turned her head and looked the young woman directly up and down with an expression of such absolute, profound, devastating disgust that the girl instantly took a physical, trembling step backward, completely silenced by the sheer weight of Eleanor's glare. "That necklace highly belongs in a secure bank vault, you cheap, heavily discounted synthetic replica," Eleanor hissed, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. She completely ignored the girl and turned her full attention back down to her soaking wet, completely paralyzed son. "The old lady is officially taking her $50,000 back, Gregory. The executive wire fraud department at Chase Manhattan is currently completely reversing the unauthorized transfer. I am also entirely taking the Audi. And I am vigorously taking whatever microscopic shred of dignity you mistakenly thought you possessed." Eleanor confidently held out her hand, her palm flat and entirely, completely unyielding. "You have exactly 60 seconds to hand over the heavy aluminum keys to my vehicle," Eleanor commanded, her voice forcefully ringing out like a highly aggressive judge delivering a final death sentence. "Before I step outside and officially report the brake fluid alert to the local police precinct as an actively stolen vehicle operated by a known, highly hostile actor." Greg was visibly, heavily hyperventilating. His chest heaved violently. He desperately, frantically patted patted down his completely soaked pockets with trembling, entirely uncoordinated hands. He finally pulled out the heavy Audi key fob and practically dropped it directly into his mother's waiting palm. Eleanor completely closed her fist around the keys, gave him one final, entirely devastating look of total parental failure, and smoothly turned her back on him, walking completely straight toward the hotel exit without ever checking to see if I was closely following. I stepped confidently up to the exact edge of the table. Greg heavily looked up at me, his eyes entirely bloodshot red, massive tears of total humiliation and sheer panic actively welling in the corners. He reached out a violently trembling hand directly toward me. "Ronnie, please," he whimpered, his voice cracking horribly. "Please, we can talk about this. Don't do this to me. I made a massive, terrible mistake." I didn't blink. I didn't offer a single, microscopic micro-expression of sympathy. I forcefully reached into the front pocket of my tote bag and aggressively pulled out a thick, heavily stapled stack of highly aggressive legal documents. I had my retainer lawyer secretly draft them weeks ago when I first noticed heavily obfuscated, unauthorized late-night charges on our joint credit card, but I entirely lacked the definitive, irrefutable proof to fully pull the trigger. Today, Siri had cheerfully delivered that exact proof directly into my lap. I violently slammed the heavy stack of papers forcefully down onto the wet, sticky marble table, right next to his completely empty bourbon glass. The bold, massive black text on the front page clearly read, "Petition for absolute dissolution of marriage. Consider this the complete beta test of your brand new reality," I whispered, leaning in incredibly close so only he could hear the final nail being aggressively driven into the coffin. "I completely checked your MacBook. I securely checked your cloud storage. They are currently completely empty, unallocated space. I'm a senior developer, Greg. I don't waste my highly valuable time trying to debug fundamentally broken code. I entirely delete it. You've been entirely, irreversibly deprecated." I sharply turned on my heel, my posture perfectly, completely straight, and confidently walked out of the dimly lit bar, leaving him physically, entirely trapped in the booth in front of the entire hotel. The complete fallout was entirely swift, heavily brutal, and completely permanent. I drove the Audi completely straight back to Eleanor's massive, sprawling estate. Greg was forcefully forced to take a highly humiliating, incredibly expensive public Uber back to our shared house, only to entirely find the digital smart locks completely, entirely reprogrammed and his pathetic, damp suitcases sitting aggressively on the front porch. He had absolutely no car. His primary, entirely joint bank accounts were violently, aggressively frozen by his own mother's legal team pending a massive criminal fraud investigation over the $50,000 transfer, and he was completely, entirely locked out of his digital life. During the emergency, highly aggressive preliminary divorce hearing, Greg's heavily overpriced, entirely frantic lawyer attempted to forcefully argue that my remote wipe of his devices was a highly malicious destruction of marital property. My attorney smoothly, confidently countered with the undeniable, fully documented fact that the laptop was completely registered under my LLC's mobile device management network, making it proprietary, entirely protected company hardware, and I was simply enforcing standard, legally binding data security protocols against a highly compromised, entirely unauthorized user. The judge didn't just agree, she openly, loudly scoffed at his pathetic defense. Greg is currently living in a heavily downgraded, incredibly depressing, completely tiny studio apartment near the industrial park. Eleanor hasn't spoken a single, entirely isolated word to him since the hotel lobby, but she did entirely ensure her high-powered estate lawyer formally served him with a massive, highly aggressive civil lawsuit for the grand theft and temporary conversion of the priceless family heirloom necklace, which the completely terrified Mistress had frantically, desperately mailed back to the estate in a generic padded envelope the very next morning. My entire framework is completely clean. My operational environment is finally entirely stable. I aggressively excised a highly malicious virus that was actively, silently draining my massive resources and highly threatening my core systems. But as I sit here quietly in my entirely optimized home office, looking at the finalized, digitally signed divorce decree on my monitor, I sometimes intensely think about the look of absolute, primal terror on his face when his own mother aggressively poured that freezing drink entirely over his expensive lap in a crowded room. Am I the monster here, or did he get exactly what he deserved?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.